Alright, we're going to do something a little different here on the Grand Solar Minimum channel today. This is Paul Beckwith, climate system scientist. He is a firm believer in man-made global warming. And I had a subscriber drop a link to a video about him debunking the Grand Solar Minimum and its abrupt climate change. So, debunking Grand Solar Minimum in abrupt climate change, itsy bitsy, 2 new videos. I don't know what itsy bitsy is. I'm not quite sure the scientific term for itsy bitsy, but there you have it. Now, here he has a 2-part series of debunking the Grand Solar Minimum, and I want to read this stuff real quick, and then I'll go ahead and show you this video. We'll talk. The video itself speaks volumes. The idea of the Grand Solar Minimum causing weather extremes, specifically cooling, on parts of our planet today is deeply flawed, just wrong, and has no basis in reality. I clearly explain here how variability in sunspots cause tiny changes in solar output and changes in climate impact, and is eeny weeny teeny compared to greenhouse gas impact. Let me repeat this. The effects of sunspots, according to Paul Beckwith, is eeny weeny teeny compared to greenhouse gas impacts. I'm sold already. I mean, with that kind of professional and scientific talk, I don't know how anyone could deny what this man's saying. Let's move on. All solar cycles reflected in sunspot counts on an 11-year timescale, which clearly cannot explain the abrupt climate change occurring. I know, it gets funnier. Now, here's the funny part. This one's funny to me. He says that many people are worried and scared about climate change causing extreme weather events like torrential rains with floods, droughts, high winds, etc., increasing in severity, duration, frequency, and impact. They're already happening. Look around in the news. I can't believe, I mean, seriously, look around in the news, my friend. I don't know how to explain this to you, but all of 2017 showed us was an increase of storms that had floods. Droughts have increased at a more frequency, at a higher intensity, longer durations, high winds. All of this is happening. Of course, he conveniently leaves out the snow factor in the whole thing so far, which we'll get to later as well. Moving along, many unscientific theories as to the cause are being invoked, even promoted, either innocently through the lack of science knowledge or fraudulently for nefarious reasons. The idea that the sun changes, the Grand Solar Minimum or GSM, are the root cause is utter nonsense. All right. Now, Paul, you want to talk about being a fraud? Let's talk about being a fraud, shall we? Let's go ahead and check out a little bit of this man's beginning of his debunking of the Grand Solar Minimum and abrupt climate change. Let's watch this.
Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith. I'm at the University of Ottawa Laboratory for Paleoclimatology. This is my website. Just Google paulbeckwith.net. And you can, or just Google, go on YouTube and Google Paul Beckwith climate change or something like that. And something like that. I've actually produced hundreds of videos on, why I think we're in a climate emergency now, what's happened to the climate in the past, present, and where I expect we'll be going in the future. I rely on donations through PayPal. You don't need a PayPal account, just a credit card.
Thank you, Paul, for the instructions on how to pay you for your precious information right off the bat. I mean, thank you so much. We haven't even seen the presentation yet, but thank you for showing me where your PayPal button is, because that, to me, that's secondary, right? This is nothing. That PayPal, oh wait, you did say you rely on donations for your work before we've even heard what you've even said. So this could be total nonsense, which actually it is, but I love how he talks about fraud, how people are promoting grand solar minimum as a cooling cycle that are fraudulent for that. But yet during the very opening of his first video about debunking the grand solar minimum, he conveniently shows us where his PayPal is. It gets better, folks. Watch this.
On that for my work in producing these videos. So in this video, I'm going to talk about something that, okay, in a previous video,
I talked about lots of different crazy ideas that people are trying to use to explain what's happening with the weather disruption and climate disruption that we're experiencing. In this particular video, I'm going to focus on the idea, the claim. I'm going to debunk the claim that people are using to say that, we're getting cold weather in North America, or we did a few months ago, so we're on the way to a grand solar minimum. It's got nothing to do with fossil fuels and greenhouse gases.
Okay, that was the only part where he told the truth. And I know he was being sarcastic, but he's right. Fossil fuels have nothing to do with this. You're absolutely correct.
HARP, like the HAARP idea, sending radio waves up into the ionosphere to disrupt weather patterns. I talked about the polar shift. I'll do a separate video on the polar shift because it is shifting, but the time scale certainly can't explain what we're seeing with weather and climate patterns.
I'm trying to make sense of this, where it was hotter than ever back in those centuries with 275 parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere, and today it's almost double that, and we are cooling, and our temperatures are nowhere near the medieval period. But this is entertaining, so let's continue, because that's all this is.
This is a crazy claim, but this video is focused on. In a previous video, cockamamie ideas to explain climate change, you can Google it. I talked about...
That's because you have blinders on right now. What's happening has everything to do with the grand solar minimum, and I've heard about magnetic pole shift and what its relevance is as well. But that's because you have blinders on and you don't believe the science in grand solar minimum. Global warmists don't think this way.
I also talked about the idea of chemtrails and, invoke the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus. Pick your...
So he's going to go ahead and put the grand solar minimum in a category with the Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and chemtrails. That's where this guy's mentality is. But he wants you to believe that he's telling you the truth.
Pick your explanation. I mean... people are going into contortions trying to explain phenomena, and yet they won't just recognize the Occam's razor, the simplest explanation. We've changed the chemistry of the atmosphere and oceans with our greenhouse gases, and we're suffering the consequences. Sure. So one of the interesting things is to try to figure out the motivations behind people who have these cockamamie ideas. And I came across this book. I was at the University of Ottawa bookstore, and I knew of the existence of this book here, but I purchased a copy. It looks really interesting, The Mathematical Modeling of Zombies. It's by...
Okay. We are now 3 minutes into this video, and if you see my cursor here, he goes on to read parts of this book, and by about 6 minutes do we begin to talk about the grand solar minimum. But so the people who are coming up with the ideas of global cooling are probably the same people that are behind the formula of this book, basically zombies. And to make matters worse, here you have a link to the book on his website as well. Make sure you pick up your copy today, folks, because this man here, oh wait, and once again, we can't forget this part. Donating does not need a PayPal account, but simply a credit card. Please click here. Right above it, please consider donating to support my work. I put a lot of time and effort into researching, studying, and producing my videos so that you can learn how quickly our world is changing. Now he wants you to think that he's doing you a service right now by lying to you and calling people who are promoting global cooling with fraudulent claims. Now, my biggest issue with all of this is when I see real people like Dr. Chuck Weiss in a presentation. Let's fix that. When I see real people like Dr. Chuck Weiss, who puts on a real presentation about global cooling and also has a degree in atmospheric science, and promoted a petition that was signed by 31,000 scientists that found the words quoted, "There is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or greenhouse gases is causing or will cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere." In other words, these scientists, these 31,000 PhD scientists, agree that what this man here is saying, Mr. Paul Beckwith, is absolutely false. And you, sir, are the fraud for trying to convince others that CO2 drives the climate and the sun is a very small percentage of what the climate. I think you need to continue to research and continue to study. Apparently, there's not a lot of funding coming in for your work because it's fraudulent itself. Folks, beware of these people who are asking for money like this. The main emphasis of their channel revolves around donating to PayPal. All I'm saying is this man is more worried about getting paid for his lies, really, because Al Gore is getting paid for it. He knows this is an easy gravy train. The majority of the public believes that CO2 drives the climate because of puppets like Paul Beckwith and Al Gore tell the public, and because they call themselves a climate scientist, people believe it. But there's no science going on here. All he's doing is making a mockery of the historic research of the grand solar minimum, the years of work that's been put into this to find out what really is going on. And history doesn't lie, folks. The data is in front of us. Everything that we've seen so far matches up with what a grand solar minimum brings. There's no denying right now that the sunspot count has everything to do with our climate. We haven't had a sunspot in 12 days straight now. It's over 40 for the year, I believe. We've seen some very cold weather in March. Some places still getting snow, and it's almost spring. But yet, people like Paul Beckwith want to tell you that people shouldn't be worried about abrupt climate change causing extreme weather events like torrential rains with floods, droughts, high winds, etc., and increasing in severity, duration, frequency, and the impact of the storms. I don't know about you folks. Sounds like that's already started. Beware. YouTube's biggest climate fraud